And welcome back to Richo. I must say, Josh Frydenberg is one of those people in the Liberal Party who just has future written all over him. There's no doubt about that. He is very, very good at what he does. And he's the Parliamentary Secretary in charge of getting red tape. And as I think I've said to you before, every government promises to get rid of red tape and every government adds to it. He thinks he's going to be the one to break the mould. Let's hope he is. But he's also, of course, pretty widely respected with his views on foreign affairs. So I had the opportunity to ask him quite a few questions in an interview I conducted just a couple of hours ago. Here it is. Josh Frydenberg, welcome to the program.
Nice to be with you, Richo.
Always a pleasure. Now, when we spoke, I think it was just after the election, a few weeks after, you'd gotten the job to get rid of red tape. And I said to you then that every government promises to get rid of red tape and every government adds to it. Are you going to be like those other governments, or will you actually succeed in the task?
I will absolutely succeed, and we've got a $1 billion a year annual target for red and green tape reduction, and we've hit the ground running, Richo, in terms of environmental approvals. We've got the signatories from all states and territories for one-stop shops. In terms of helping small business, what we're going to do is put the paid parental leave scheme administration through the Family Assistance Office. So too with superannuation payments.
But
allow small business owners.
Hang on, wait, 3 deep breaths here. There's no way in the end, with all this talk of the age of entitlement is over, how could you possibly still do the paid parental leave scheme? I mean, I have to. You've now got a Commission of Audit which will definitely recommend against it. You can't tell me it'll actually happen.
Well, there already is a paid parental leave scheme. We just want to make it better and a fair income one. So we're talking about the administration of the current paid parental leave scheme.
I was assuming that you were talking about the new one, which of course won't happen. But all right, well, I'm glad we've cleared that up. That's fine. But what about?
So we're doing quite a bit for small business. We're doing quite a bit in the education space, in childcare, and we're going to have our first ever repeal day in the Federal Parliament on the 26th of March. The legislation will be introduced on the 19th of March. And Richo, this is based on what happens in other jurisdictions, like in the United States Congress with their corrections calendar, where parliamentarians will get together on one day to repeal a whole series of regulations in a whole series of portfolio areas, which have either been on the statute books for years and years and are redundant, or are currently adding a burden to compliance for big business, small business and the not-for-profit sector. So that's going to happen on the 26th of March, and we've already lined up a whole series of legislative changes for that day.
Well, will it involve in the end some simplification of things like the Tax Act, which provide enormous burdens for business on all sorts of levels and are so complex that virtually no one can understand them? Is there any plan to reduce any of that?
Oh, look, we're looking at all areas, including the simplification around compliance for taxpayers, because you're right, the Tax Act has become, just so big that even the Federal Court has found that it's just become too difficult to read for the judges. So we need to do some simplification around there. We've actually identified 8,000 redundant legislative instruments that have been sitting on the statute books, which have just been building up paper, but actually not having any practical effect for the betterment of the community. So we're going to get rid of those 8,000 redundant legislative instruments, and that's right across the board, Richo.
And this will actually mean savings for small business in particular?
Oh, absolutely. And what savings mean is actually increased productivity and more jobs, because we understand that it's business, not government, that actually creates real jobs in the community. So this all comes back down to productivity. In fact, Australia's multi-factor productivity, Richo, has fallen by around 3% in the 5 years from mid-2007. So we actually have to turn the Australian economy around, and one of the ways we can do that is by cutting red and green tape.
Yeah, the trouble is, though, you're going to cut more than red and green tape in the May budget, aren't you?
Well, there certainly will be some big cuts there, because we need to. I mean, we were bequeathed a fiscal nightmare by the Labor Party, by Julia Gillard and by Kevin Rudd. I mean, 200,000 more people are unemployed under their watch. And also we've got, over $600 billion of debt that's going to accumulate over the coming years. So drastic action is required, but we're up to the task.
Yeah, look, I hope so, because I do believe that the action's required. I'm just not sure that you're going to do it very quickly. I keep hearing these hints that instead of doing what you said you'd do, bringing us back to surplus in 2016 and 17, and that was a promise, that's going to get pushed way back. Have you heard the same thing, or aren't you allowed to tell me?
Well, we're going to make the cuts that are necessary, but we're also going to stimulate the economy. And one of the ways we're going to do that is through the deregulation agenda and also some of the industrial relations changes we've proposed at the last election, as well as getting rid of the carbon tax, the mining tax, and reintroduce the Australian Building and Construction Commission. Those sort of changes will actually boost productivity, create lots of new jobs, and help create rising living standards for Australians.
Well, look, I'm finding it harder and harder to mount arguments to oppose the reintroduction of the ABCC. But the idea of royal commissions into whether or not a couple of blokes pinched money at the HSU or something that might have happened in the AW 20 years ago, I just find that so over the top that I just can't believe Tony Abbott has so little class as to do it.
Well, firstly, on the ABCC, I'm glad to hear you say that, Richo, because it was an effective cop on the beat, policing what was lawlessness in the construction sector, particularly in my state of Victoria. It led to millions of dollars of penalties actually being enforced. It led to a $6 billion productivity dividend and a dramatic reduction in the days lost through industrial disputation. So that effectively worked. What we've said in terms of a judicial inquiry is let's have one into where the union movement has shown to be amiss, let's say, with relation to the HSU. But we're holding our fire on a broader judicial inquiry, and I don't want to preempt any announcements or decisions that may be made by Tony Abbott, Eric Abetz and their cabinet colleagues.
But I mean, you know, is there a case, and I know this was mentioned today, is there a case for looking at things like what's happened with David Jones and insider trading and what chairmen can permit some of their directors to do? I mean, because I find that whole saga of David Jones quite extraordinary.
Well, without commenting on the particulars of that case, directors' duties are absolutely fundamental to good governance in our economy. They need to be upheld and they have the force of the law behind it. So that's absolutely critical.
They're also pretty important to all of those people who've got their superannuation invested in funds that invest in these big companies. And I really am worried about that. That's something I intend to follow up. But let me move on, because I've got so many things I wanted to ask you. First of all, I spoke to Greg Sheridan earlier on tonight about some of these issues, and the first one was what's happening with Indonesia. Are we at risk of doing serious damage to the relationship that Australia has with Indonesia by the turning back of the boats, or the putting them in new boats and sending them back, or whatever else we're doing? I mean, is this going to be a problem for the relationship?
Absolutely not. We've got a very strong and important relationship with the Indonesian government, but also at the people-to-people links. Don't forget, when John Howard was in office, he went to Jakarta for the inauguration of SBY. On his watch, President Wahid visited Australia, the first Indonesian president to do so in more than 2 decades. We were there for Indonesia after the tsunami disaster, as well as during the Asian financial crisis.
Oh yeah, but if you read, wait a minute, mate. If you read the news, the papers in Indonesia over the course of the last 12 months, you wouldn't have thought any of that had happened. Any of it.
Well, can I say they've been a very important partner and continue to be an important partner for us in counter-terrorism. On border protection, they understand that this is a sovereignty issue for Australia. We just can't have the situation continue as it did under Labor, with more than 50,000 unauthorised boat arrivals. It's not in Indonesia's relationship, Richo, to have more than 10,000 people stuck on their islands ready to depart for a life in Australia. That's not in Indonesia's interest, because often those people are coming from third countries. So there is actually some good cooperation going on behind the scenes. Obviously, you're going to have some difficulties and some issues when you're dealing with such a difficult challenge as stopping the boats. But I'm very firm in my opinion that the fundamentals in the relationship with Indonesia are good, that it's in both countries' interests to have a productive and a constructive relationship, and it will continue to strengthen under Tony Abbott and Julie Bishop's leadership.
All right, I'm getting a wind-up signal, because it's always interesting talking to you. But one last question. What about the Griffith by-election? Who's going to win? I mean, I assumed some months ago that it would definitely be the coalition, but I'm getting some advice that may not be the case.
Well, we couldn't have a better candidate than we do in Bill Glasson, former head of the AMA, a small business owner, someone who lives with his family in the electorate. I campaigned with him on Monday in Griffith, and he was out there with getting a very warm reception from the small business owners in his electorate. And he did wonderfully well at the last election, Richo.
You expect to
he
win?
got a
That's
greater
the question,
primary.
though. Will he win?
But he got, look, I'm hoping he wins. History will tell you that it's very hard for governments in by-elections. History tells you that. But we couldn't have a better candidate, and I'm very hopeful he'll win. He got a bigger primary vote at the last election than Kevin Rudd. He had a 6.5% swing to him. He's the right man for the job, and it calls for a Liberal in Griffith.
Yeah, one of the problems is if you got a big swing last time, there mightn't be that much you can add to it. But I've got to leave it there. Josh, I really do appreciate you coming in tonight on short notice. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Richo.
He knows what he's doing, that bloke. He certainly is very, very good. The Liberals have got a good future with someone like that. Now, I should say that next week I'll be back with Richo and Reith on Tuesday night, as well as Richo on Wednesday. But I want you all to take note that on the 18th of February, Tuesday week, Alan Jones will be back, and Richo and Jones, which was supposed to start, 3 weeks ago, will finally get a start in 2 weeks' time. Alan Jones has had some back surgery. He's recovering, looking good, and we'll be seeing him on Tuesday week. But next week, remember, Richo and Reith on Tuesday and Richo on Wednesday.